The Russians are not playing chess anymore. They're playing Go. In a way, it's a game of who breaks first. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian military personnel could be encircled. And like I've said many times, this is one of the most threatening situations for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Ah, Saint Javelin, the new patron, protector of Ukraine. She's holding the holy grail of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. This anti-tank guided missile launcher. But is it enough to save the country? Hi and welcome to History Legends. Here's a new update about the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you have any new information, updates, just comment it below. This is the place where we cut the BS and where you learn what's actually going on. Are you ready? Let's go! Russian incompetence, Ukrainian victories. Truth is, the last days have been a rude awakening for Russian commanders. Many proved to be outright incompetent. Many assaults have failed simply due to poor planning, poor combined arms coordination, as you know, poor management of logistics. We all saw the Russian vehicles abandoned because of the lack of fuel. You get the idea. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have won many tactical victories. Senior US defense officials assess that Putin has put in 90% of his pre-staged combat power across the border into Ukraine. And now he has to bring reserves that were not planned for Ukraine. And this is also why he sent the infamous 10,000 Chechens to Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are literally holding the bull by its horns. And they're making sure the entire planet knows about it. Lately, they fought extremely well. They recaptured the settlement of Bucha, north of Irpin on the northwestern outskirts of Kiev, a town that had earlier been occupied by Russian units. Retaking control of Bucha is primarily an ideological victory for Kiev. Now, overall, I feel the media is only showing us a very narrow vision of what's actually happening on the ground. Broadcasting local events, tactical victories, destroyed Russian columns, but we don't get a sense of what's actually happening on a strategic level. First, let's look at casualties. Russia has claimed they have lost a little bit over 2,000 killed or wounded. Meanwhile, Ukrainians say it's more like 5,500. But let's say the number is in the middle, so 2,500 to 3,000. It's still very high for only 1 week of battle. Now, as always for this conflict, we have very little information coming from Ukraine regarding their military losses. And that's kind of a red flag. We don't know for sure, but according to Russian sources, it's between 8,500 and 11,000 total casualties. Most likely an exaggeration, but we can see that it's 1 Russian for 2 Ukrainians. And it kind of makes sense if we take into account Russian firepower. Now, the big thing is that Russia has lost so many vehicles in the last 7 days. And many of them were simply abandoned on the side of the road. Some were even towed by tractors. It's not that they can't be replaced. Many also blame the poor construction of these vehicles, which could definitely be a factor. So it is clear that Russian units are suffering from battle fatigue and attrition. But the same goes for Ukrainian regular forces. They also face logistical issues. To an extent, with the help of the local population, they can kind of circumvent this problem, but it's still present. However, as opposed to the Russians, Ukrainian combat-ready units are constantly on the front line, with very little reserves to replace them and give them a break. And on top of that, now they're constantly getting bombarded and it's just gonna get worse. Now there have also been a lot of reports about the morale of Russian soldiers. Many said that they didn't know that they would take part in a war and that it was just a training. Overall, they're not well informed of what's happening. And of course, the poor living conditions. Sadly, this has always been the case in Russian Soviet armies. The high command always wanted to maintain the highest level of secrecy and ensure that no information is revealed if the soldiers are captured. So for Soviet commanders, the solution is to simply leave the soldiers clueless. Germans said the same thing about Soviet prisoners during World War II. Now the summary of the strategic situation. After a week in battle, the Russian command seems to have taken into account their mistakes of the last days. They stopped their fast-paced cavalry operation and replaced it with a slow, step-by-step, full-scale military operation. And like you might have noticed, maneuvers are much slower now. And overall, Russian forces are much more careful. Let's talk about the Northern Front. In Kiev, Ukrainian forces are launching what I feel to be sorties, aka breakouts, to push the Russians as far as possible from the city and gain a glacis, an extra cushion of defense to gain time before the Russians reach the capital. And that caused the Russians to completely stop fruitless frontal attacks. Instead, they're simply encircling the city from the west through the axis Borodyanka-Makariv. Now the Ukrainians are well aware of this maneuver, and now many Ukrainian groups are harassing Russian convoys south of Borodyanka, and thus kind of blocking the main road. They're giving a lot of trouble to the Russians. Generally speaking, the Russian objective is to drive south towards Fastiv, and then completing the encirclement on the west bank by pushing towards the Dnieper river. And for this, they have to control the city of Vasilkiv. Allegedly, some Russian units have already been spotted there, and then from there, they have to secure the city of Obukiv. Basically, we witnessed the setup of a proper siege. That means sealing off every exit, as well as any reinforcements or supplies going inside the city. And that includes the much needed javelins, but also food and ammunition and all this. The Russians also spoke of humanitarian corridors to let the civilian population out of Kiev. Historically speaking, once an encirclement is completed, time is now against the defender. Now some claim that the Ukrainian airspace remains contested. Maybe, but I don't know to what extent. Because we all saw that huge 30-mile something column out in the open, and it barely got attacked. Maybe the Ukrainian Air Force is actually depleted. Maybe Russian anti-air capabilities are now stronger. I don't know. But it has also been noted that the Russian Air Force is much more careful now. And generally speaking, they prefer to simply launch missile strikes and not have aircraft involved. We've talked about the west bank of the siege, now let's talk about the east bank. On that side, the Russians have 3 ongoing sieges: Chernihiv, Konotop, and Sumy. And the Russians are using good old World War II Soviet strategy called the Deep Battle Doctrine. Break through enemy lines, bypass any strongholds, and encircle enemy forces. The Russians are not playing chess anymore. They're playing Go, where you win by completing the encirclement of enemy tokens. However, just like in Go, the Russians are running out of tokens to complete and finish off these encirclements. That most likely means that they have to finish off one of these cities in order to besiege Kiev on the east bank. Now, allegedly, the Ukrainian military blew up a bridge in Barishevka. This gives us a clue that Russian forces must be nearby. Otherwise, why would they do it? And I think the Russian objective now is to capture the airport of Boryspil in order to airdrop as many soldiers as they can right next to Kiev instead of going through the entire logistical nightmare from Belarus or from Kursk, and avoid having the entire airport destroyed like in Gostomel. There's also something I've been thinking about. This is a very tough position to be in for President Zelensky from an operational level. If your forces abandon the capital, Putin will 100% use it for political gains. And if you stay, you accept to be encircled and lose initiative. The Southern Front. The Russians face a similar situation there. While many Russian units are immobilized at Kharkiv due to stubborn Ukrainian defense, just like in Kiev, mobile Ukrainian groups carry out raids against Russian supply columns, aka guerrilla warfare. And it's a nightmare for the Russians. And at this moment, Russians suddenly get many flashbacks from Afghanistan. Now let's take a step back and look at the operational level. We can kind of see that the Russians have kind of given up on the frontal assault on Kharkiv and prefer to encircle the city. I know, you've heard that many times already. One hook towards the Poltava axis. I don't know the Russian strength in this area per se, but we know that multiple Russian units are active in this region. And then there's another hook east of the city. Apparently some Russian units took control of the city of Balakleya. They're also approaching Izium with further plans to advance towards Slavyansk. Overall, this push is concerning because with that one token, just like in Go, you seal both Kharkiv and the entire Ukrainian army group in Donbass. A maneuver similar to what the Russians did at Stalingrad. Once again, Ukrainians are well aware of these maneuvers and they're reacting. On the 2nd of March, apparently some Ukrainian units are planning to redeploy from Kharkiv for the defense of the capital, Kiev. If this is true, given the large number of Ukrainian troops in the city and all the Russian forces roaming across the countryside, this will be a tricky operation to coordinate. As you know, retreats are one of the hardest maneuvers to pull off. So it's true that the Russians are overstretching their supply lines, but at the same time they're also cutting off Ukrainian supply lines. In a way, it's a game of who breaks first. Meanwhile, Russian forces are clearing settlements in the Zaporizhia region, most likely to secure their flanks for a push towards the city of Zaporizhia. And like I've said many times, this is one of the most threatening situations for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian military personnel could be encircled. But again, I'm pretty sure Ukrainian generals are well aware of it. And I think they have already started to slowly pull their troops away from the contact line and withdraw towards the Dnieper River. Mariupol remains besieged by Russian forces. A massive assault is unlikely given the huge number of Ukrainian forces there. The siege will most likely be difficult for both sides because at this time no Ukrainian units are available to break the siege. So keep an eye on this battle. I think it will be important. If Mariupol holds, it will be one more thorn in the foot of the Russians. And if they can't capture Mariupol, forget it about Kiev. However, if Mariupol and its defenders fall, Russian forces will have a major morale boost, especially considering that Mariupol has multiple thousand Ukrainian soldiers. If they're out of action, that's gonna have an impact on the battle for sure. Overall, this cauldron is a pretty terrifying situation. Ukrainian forces have to hold on their flanks, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and allow the bulk of their forces to withdraw in order. If they can withdraw to the Dnieper, they could even help Kiev and break the siege. But there's also the west bank of the Crimean front. Kherson, a city of 300,000 inhabitants, is the first major urban center to fall in Russian hands. And the Ukrainian government should be worried that it fell so quickly. Russian forces are now battling for Mykolaiv, a city of 500,000 people. The Russians will most likely try to pull off the same trick they use on Kherson, encircle the city and get it to fall quickly. From there, the Russians have two options. Unlike what I previously said, the Russians will most likely not drive towards Dnipro, because supplying this effort would be very difficult. Instead, they could either capture Odessa, which is actually only a step away from Mykolaiv, and they could benefit of the support of Russian warships, or do what British intelligence believe they'll do, a push into western Ukraine, a region with very few large urban centers, and then link up with the siege in Kiev. Again, this would be an unmitigated disaster for Ukraine. The country is effectively cut in half. The Ukrainian army would face double, triple, quadruple encirclements, and the much needed Western weapons would not be able to reach the soldiers on the ground. Now I'm well aware that drawing this arrow on the map is easy, but to complete this action in real life is much more complicated, since the logistics have to follow up with this push. And as we know, this is not the strong point of the Russian army. Now what should the Ukrainian army do? Anyone following the situation in Ukraine is most likely very familiar with Rob Lee and his insightful Twitter updates about the war. Here John Spencer said, "I strongly disagree with military news commenters saying Ukraine war is mobile warfare and the Ukraine military needs to do that. This is an urban positional war, an urban defense in depth. It is about holding terrain. The Ukrainians won't win moving around, defense is stronger." And Rob Lee replied, 100%. Large-scale counterattacks would just play into the Russian military strength. Preventing Russia from achieving a quick and easy victory is the best strategy for the Ukrainian military. And that's why Ukrainians have to hold Zaporizhia at all costs. But the problem is that they also have to hold in Chernihiv, Konotop, Sumy, Mariupol, and now Mykolaiv. But you see the trend. Many Ukrainian forces are getting encircled with little hope of being rescued. We keep talking about Russian morale falling. I'm pretty sure the morale of these pockets of resistance is also pretty low. So this goes back to what I said previously. The Ukrainian military has to withdraw to the Dnieper River. If Russian forces have trouble in urban areas, imagine if it's coupled with a massive river. That's all I have for you today. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget that this video was made possible thanks to my Patreons.